let's now talk with the Center Square Associate Editor, Kim Jarrett, about what could be happening to Georgia taxpayers. Kim, thanks for taking time with us. Things are still rolling and pieces are being put together, but looks like Georgia legislators are eyeing getting rid of the state income tax there. What's the latest?
Well, they had crossover day last week, which was on Friday, which these bills had to get through their respective chambers to make it through the legislature. The Senate had meetings all summer long about eliminating the income tax. They met with stakeholders, they met with businesses, they met with everyday citizens, a woman who said, hey, it would help me buy formula for my child. And they came up with a plan in January that says, okay, what we want to do is reduce this gradually and move to zero state income tax in 6 years. The problem with that, and what there have been some questions raised since they announced this plan, is how are you going to pay for it? The income tax brings in about $16 billion in Georgia. We got a copy of the fiscal note of the bill and looked at it, and their plan initially is to take away some of the tax breaks that they give to businesses. Some of them are interesting, very little known tax breaks, like a tax break on boat parts for yachts that you might not have even known about. So that was their initial thing. But the fiscal note says that's only going to bring in possibly, I think, at $1.8 billion. So as they're moving toward this, yes, who doesn't want to have their income tax removed? But there are questions being raised from experts, the Tax Foundation, about how is Georgia going to pay for this?
Yeah, one of the big questions about taxation, some say it's the state's money, but really, that's coming out of taxpayers' pockets to pay for all of this. And I'm sure there's going to be, if there hasn't already been, part of the debate from each side of the argument on this as to, well, who's better to spend those dollars? Should taxpayers be able to keep that money and spend it in the economy, generating more revenue for, say, sales taxes and such, or is it best to have the government control how those dollars are spent? So I imagine, Kim, that's going to be an ongoing debate. But to that fiscal note, you did share with us that copy, and we've got a graphic here. And for people who look at these types of things, maybe you can help kind of, shed some light on that. And we're looking at these numbers here. They're in parentheses. That means negative, right? And those are in millions, which if you look, it's 1.2 billion there on that first line. How much are we talking about here in possible negative outcome for Georgia tax revenue?
Well, it looks like right now with just that, and all they have in the fiscal note is that one tax break. It does not cover the $16 billion that they're going to have to make up. And that's been the big question. In fact, when this bill passed in February, when it first passed the Senate, there wasn't even a fiscal note. If for people who don't do this like you and I do every day, Greg, a fiscal note on the bill basically explains what the impact is going to be to state revenues.
And you got to think, if they're going to get rid of an income tax, that's a significant impact. Yeah, $16 billion, and that's annually.
Yes, and we talked to Daniel, Dr. Daniel Canso at the Georgia Budget and Public Policy Institute. He says that is the biggest question. Is you can't just, and even the Tax Foundation, they've said. In fact, they call the proposal kind of nearsighted. Georgia, another thing to go along with this is Georgia's been in an amazing fiscal position for a long time. They got over the Great Recession. I don't know many states where you could say, hey, we gave our taxpayers back a $250 tax break if you're single, $500 if you're married. Georgia's done that for the past 2 or 3 years because they've had so much of a surplus. So they have been giving back to taxpayers. The argument for getting rid of the income tax is largely competitiveness. Tennessee, to the north of Georgia, does not have an income tax, but Tennessee has an extremely high sales tax. And I cover Tennessee as well. A lot of talks in Tennessee about how reliant Tennessee is on the sales tax for their revenue. I don't cover Florida. I don't know as much about Florida, but Florida does not have an income tax. But I'm surmising tourism brings in a lot of money there. So, states are different. And looking at Georgia, we have, it's anywhere between 43% to 48% of the total state revenue every year comes from the income tax. So, yeah, who doesn't want to not have to pay income tax? But down the road, somewhere that money has got to be made up.
Especially if you have years of spending at certain levels and programs that people are relying on, and if you're going to remove a substantial portion of that revenue that's coming into a state, the policymakers are going to have to grapple with that. But as you said, Tennessee not having a income tax, and there's a handful of states across the country that don't have an income tax. Alaska, Florida, as you mentioned, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Wyoming. Again, these states that are seeing more people move into those states, some saying it's because of the taxation issue. So, yeah, you can see how maybe Georgia has Tennessee and Florida nearby, and they want to be competitive.
Mm-hmm. And you have other states. I think North Carolina is one of them who are also reducing the state income tax rate, which is also something that we have done. It was over 5. We're in the process of reducing it down. I think their current proposal was one proposal floating in the House right now that did pass that would gradually take it down to 3.99% because Georgia has that flat tax that they enacted a few years ago where it's a percentage. So you have a lot. It's not like Georgia is not trying to reduce taxes. It's just a question of where's the money going to come from? Is this feasible? And what will it do to us in the long term? We all know that inflation is affecting state government as well. Also, there's not as much money there. COVID dollars that were just giving states were just awash in money for a long time because of COVID dollars. Well, those are almost spent. And then we're seeing the effects of inflation and revenues are a bit down. So you're not only, if you take away the income tax, you've got other things that you have to wrestle with in the future.
No question. Kim, as you said, you watch a lot of what's going on as associate editor for the Center Square in Georgia and Tennessee. And there's another story you had this week out of Georgia that I think is rather fascinating. You found a lawmaker who didn't report his pay while they were collecting unemployment benefits.
We have had 3 state lawmakers who have been charged with making false statements in relation to pandemic unemployment fraud. Dexter Sharper, who pleaded guilty this week, is the 3rd. We also had Karen Bennett. She pleaded guilty back in January to the same charge. And we also have another one, Sharon Henderson. She was a state representative who was charged back in December for not reporting her pandemic unemployment benefits that she was getting. All of the cases are different. With Sharon Henderson, she did not resign her seat. The governor suspended her from her House of Representatives seat. So now she's running for Senate. She has not pleaded guilty to the charges as of yet. She claimed she was a substitute teacher when the pandemic hit, and she filed for benefits in the summer and said, I should get them. But according to prosecutors, no, substitute teachers are not eligible for unemployment. In the case of Karen Bennett, she was working for a church and not reporting it. And so she pleaded guilty, and she will be sentenced actually on April 15th. And Dexter Sharper, the latest person who did not report his benefits, didn't report that he was making money as a state representative, also said that he wasn't making money from a party rental business, according to the indictment. And at one point that made like over $2,000 a week. There are already plea deals in place for Ms. Bennett and for Mr. Sharper, and those plea deals do not include jail time, but they are going to have to pay back more than $10,000 each to the Georgia Department of Labor.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And obviously, when these headlines happen, people can find them at thecentersquare.com. Kim, greatly appreciate it. And we'll have to keep an eye on what happens in Georgia, in particular with whether or not they're actually going to make that move and pull the trigger to get rid of the state income tax over the span of several years. So we'll be looking for your stories in the future.